devastating hurricanes, unprecedented heat waves, catastrophic flooding. An upward trend of extreme weather and climate events is leading to significant losses across the globe. In the fight against climate change, no one is a bystander. China has pledged to peak the nation's CO2 emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. To shed light on the country's journey towards sustainable development, our reporters traveled across China to capture the stories of individuals, enterprises and public institutions who are striving to make a difference. As COP29, the UN Climate Change Conference, convenes from November the 11th to the 22nd in Azerbaijan, CGTN Radio brings you a special series, Greener China, A Journey to 2060. Join us on your favorite podcast platforms to witness Chinese people's awareness, actions and the challenges we face as the country journeys into a greener future.
When people think of Yunnan province, they know it as China's kingdom of plants and animals, or a gene bank of biodiversity. It's true, Yunnan is remarkably rich in life forms. Covering just 4% of China's land area, the province is home to nearly half of the nation's protected species. It has 7 climate types within a span of just 900 kilometers, hosting almost every type of ecosystems on Earth except oceans and deserts. But this remarkable biodiversity is facing significant challenges.
Yunnan
has vast, well-preserved vegetation and is rich in biodiversity, but is also highly vulnerable to climate change, which poses a serious threat. In Gaoligong Mountain, for example, we need to study how temperature and rainfall changes affect biodiversity. Another major challenge is invasive species, which are especially prevalent here.
That was Professor Geng Yupeng from the Biodiversity Institute of Yunnan University talking about the challenges that Yunnan faces in terms of biodiversity conservation. To know more about the status quo in this regard in Yunnan and China as a whole, my colleague and I took a 3-hour flight from Beijing to Yunnan to see it for ourselves. During our stay in Kunming, the provincial capital, we talked to the locals and tourists to get a sense of their understanding of biodiversity protection. Many of them shared with us the specific measures they can take to contribute to the conservation of the flora and fauna around them. However, biodiversity experts have revealed another side of the story. Professor Geng told us that many people are still unfamiliar with the concept of biodiversity and the hazards that can really tip the balance of ecosystems.
The public's understanding of the harm caused by invasive species is still limited. Many people don't recognize common invasive species or understand their impact. For instance, animals like red-eared sliders and crayfish can be easily bought at pet markets. Some people release them into local rivers or ponds, and once released, these resilient species will establish its population and threaten native wildlife. There are also misconceptions about using non-native plants in landscaping and agriculture. While many non-native species like certain crops and flowers benefit us, some others can harm the ecology, economy, and even people's health.
The professor also highlighted the importance of conducting risk assessments before introducing non-native species to guard against such risks. From the expert's perspective, Gaoligong Mountain, which is widely considered a hotspot of biodiversity protection in northwest Yunnan, is a place that's extremely vulnerable to factors like invasive species. Stretching over 600 kilometers and covering 5 latitudes, Gaoligo Mountain exhibits an elevation difference of nearly 5,000 meters. As we mentioned in our previous episodes, the mountain's unique geographical location, complex terrain, and climate conditions have bred a variety of vegetations and habitats. During my visit, I woke up every day to a symphony of birds chirping, as the small village I stayed boasts one of China's most diverse bird habitats and is a popular destination for birdwatching. The name of the village is Baihualing, which literally means the hill of hundreds of flowers. More than 500 bird species have been spotted here, accounting for over half of the total recorded species in the whole province. Hou Ti-guo is a local legend. The 55-year-old man is Baihualing's first ever birdwatching guide. He can recognize a bird by its singing alone, and he can even tell if a bird is happy, sad, or frightened. Bird enthusiasts come from all across the country and hire Hou as their guide.
只要一鸟我都喜欢，但是来拍鸟的总是说花的偏红的是最好漂亮。
People love bright-colored birds, but for me, every bird is unique. Each has its own calls: a mating call, a nesting call, a feeding call. A single bird might sing 4 different sounds, and following the seasonal changes, their sounds change too. Their chirping sounds are especially attractive in spring.
他就问说是你在哪里？
Birdwatching is a booming business here. Over 60 villagers work as birdwatching guides, and there are 47 sites for birdwatching or photography. As the bird economy grows, many villagers who had left the village to find work elsewhere are returning to build their lives around conservation. But Hou told us not everything is perfect here. Threats to the birds remain, mostly from the local farming practices.
打农药除草剂就是破坏自然，破坏动物和鸟类。
Pesticides harm the birds and wildlife. The birds eat insects, and animals eat pesticide-treated crops. That can be deadly. It's a difficult balance. We want to protect the birds, but the farmers also need to make a living. We need both conservation and development, so people won't go hungry.
While pesticides and weed killers are hard to ban without affecting the farmer's interest, how to reduce their damage to birds and wild animals remains unsolved. For more insights on this issue, I talked with zoologist Wu Fei with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. He told me that we should refrain from using a one-size-fits-all approach.
所以这个时候就需要去科学评估，就是说。
This is where a scientific assessment is essential. We need to determine if, for example, birds are dying because they eat treated seeds, which are often coated with pesticides or chemicals to promote germination and deter pests. Finding a balance here becomes a scientific question. For endangered species like the green peafowl, even the death of one green peafowl is detrimental to the species.
我们可能政府会出钱，或者是用其他方式，我们鼓励。
In such cases, the government might offer compensation or support to encourage farmers to use untreated seeds. That's one approach, but careful assessment is needed anyway. We can't simply ban treated seeds just because they may harm wildlife.
Another concern of our birdwatching guide Hou Ti-guo is the shortage of monitoring equipment to help protect the birds. Over the past few years, authorities in Yunnan have installed infrared cameras around his village to observe and protect the birds. But Hou says they need more.
我想着希望政府再增加这个摄像机。
If only the government could provide 5 or 10 cameras per observation point. With a bit more support, we could watch over the birds much better.
Earlier this year, China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment released the country's Biodiversity Conservation Strategy and Action Plan. It highlights the need for better technology to support biodiversity protection, a call that resonates deeply with Hou and his community. The document also points out that in many regions of China, local communities are experiencing financial losses and even threats to people's health and safety, their livelihoods and property due to human-wildlife conflicts. In Gaoligong Mountain, residents are suffering from similar troubles. Ho told me that many residents complained about how wild boars and bears had wreaked havoc in their orchards and on their farmlands, eating their fruits and ruining their corn. To address this, local authorities have divided the mountain's protected areas into several zones and assigned each one with a forest ranger to monitor and track the activities of wildlife while guarding against poachers or people digging protected herbs illegally. While these rangers have helped reduce the number of accidents caused by wildlife, the job is a tough one, as the steep, mountainous terrain makes patrolling extremely difficult. Besides, there are not enough rangers. Mao Qingsheng, one of the rangers, is responsible for patrolling a vast stretch of the forest on the mountain. He told me that there are days when he survives only on dry food or wild fruit, drinking from mountain streams.
One day, we went to a high-altitude area, and it started snowing. In Yunnan, the weather can change dramatically. It was February. It snowed so hard that we couldn't turn back. We made a fire in the snow, spent the night there without blankets. This has happened 2 or 3 times.
On top of that, the shortage of rangers means that not every trail can be covered.
This place is large and steep, with many entry points. It's impossible to cover everything.
To support the rangers, the local conservation authority holds regular meetings and invite experts to train the rangers on wildlife monitoring and protection. Ying Xuejian, chief of Gaoligong Mountain Management Bureau, told me it takes a long time to train a ranger, and few young people are now interested in taking this tough job.
It takes nearly 3 years to train a ranger. They need to know the terrain and flora and the fauna of the reserve, as well as the forest laws. Recruitment is hard because the wage doesn't meet young people's expectations.
Gaoligong Mountain is not alone in these matters. Professor Geng from Yunnan University said that biodiversity protection across the whole country is faced with a series of challenges.
Scientists have categorized the challenges into 5 main issues. Firstly, habitat loss and fragmentation. This means when forests are cleared for farmland, it tends also to strip away species from their natural habitats and therefore leads to local extinction. Secondly, environmental pollution. Water pollution, for instance, can cause algal blooms that deplete oxygen, suffocating aquatic species. Thirdly, overexploitation of natural resources. Wild herbs for medicine or rare orchids are often harvested unsustainably, disrupting their reproductive cycles and reducing their populations. Fourthly, invasive species can disrupt food chains and the ecosystem balance. And lastly, climate change. Rising CO2 levels have caused an increase in the frequency of extreme weather and climate events, which also disrupt ecosystems. Species will need to migrate to survive, but habitat availability is limited, posing a further threat to their survival.
The challenges that China is facing reflect a global issue. According to a UN report, ecosystems are suffering around the world, with the loss of species on the rise since the 1970s. Human activity has altered 75% of the land and 66% of the marine environment globally. Wu Fei from the Chinese Academy of Sciences says balancing development with conservation is the crux of the issue.
这个问题是全世界的难题，包括不管是发展中国家还是落后国家。
This is the global problem, especially in developing countries. Human expansion often conflicts with conservation. For example, our need for energy often depends on natural resources, which inevitably impacts the environment. But through research, we can find solutions or at least establish some boundaries.
Earlier this year, Yunnan province took a bold step and released its own biodiversity conservation strategy and action plan. The goal is to make the province a model of biodiversity protection and contribute solutions to the world. The plan includes new laws, education initiatives, and ecosystem restoration, species recovery, and climate adaptation strategies. It embraces the country's vision to achieve harmony between people and nature by 2050, emphasizing the need for all citizens to make biodiversity conservation a personal responsibility. In the next episodes, my colleagues will take you to China's northernmost region, which boasts the country's hub for heavy industry, and tell you what the local factories have done to cut carbon emissions in an effort to build a greener China. Thank you for listening. I'm Tianyu. Goodbye.